The call. Hi, Dad. 4 minutes and 23 seconds. That was how long the call lasted. That was how long it took for $800 to leave his account. Walter Henderson was 69, a retired warehouse manager living alone in a narrow house in Pittsburgh. His wife had been dead for 23 years. His daughter, Sarah, was 35 and lived 400 miles away with her husband and 2 small children. Walter knew her phone number by heart. Sarah did not know his right knee hurt so badly now that he could no longer climb the stairs. The spoon slipped from his hand and hit the floor with a dull clink. He pushed himself up too fast from the kitchen chair. Pain shot through his right knee so hard he had to grab the edge of the table. The bowl of canned soup trembled. Rain tapped against the window over the sink, steady and cold. Thursday night, little after 8. Half a bowl of chicken noodle soup sat in front of him, already going lukewarm. The phone kept ringing on the counter. He knew the number before he saw it. Sarah. He took one step, then another, dragging his stiff leg more than lifting it. By the time he reached the counter, his breathing had turned shallow. He picked up the phone on the 4th ring and cleared his throat before answering. Hey, sweetheart. Hi, Dad. Her voice came through, bright and tired at the same time. He could hear something in the background. A cartoon, maybe? A child coughing? A cabinet door shutting? Walter leaned one hand on the counter and looked at the rain-dark glass above the sink. How are you, Dad? He smiled, even though nobody could see it. Fine. His knee throbbed so hard it felt hot. There was a pause, the kind that used to mean she was about to tell him something important when she was little. Back then, she would climb into his lap first. At 5, she had smelled like shampoo and crayons. At 10, like bubblegum and wet mittens. At 35, she smelled like nothing to him now. Just a voice through a phone. How are the kids? He asked. Eli's sick again, just a fever, I think, and Maddie's okay, but she's been impossible all week. She gave a short laugh that sounded more tired than amused. Tom's working nights, so it's just been a lot. Walter lowered himself carefully back into the chair, phone pressed close to his ear. The soup had formed a pale skin on top. That sounds like a full house. It is. Another small pause. He knew this shape, he knew every turn in it. Sarah would ask how he was. He would say fine. She would tell him things were hard. He would listen. Then, after enough words to make it feel less sharp, the real reason for the call would arrive. Walter reached into his back pocket and pulled out his wallet before she asked. The leather was worn soft at the fold. Inside were 3 20s, a 10, and 2 ones. Grocery money. Gas money, though he barely drove anymore. He stared at the bills as if they had shown up by surprise. I hate asking, Sarah said quietly. There it was. He rubbed his thumb over the edge of 120. The car needs repairs, nothing huge, but enough. And with Eli's medicine and Tom's check not coming till next week, she let out a breath. I'm sorry, I know the timing is bad. Walter looked at the rain running down the window in crooked lines. His knee gave a slow, deep pulse under the table. How much do you need? I was wondering if maybe you could help with 800, just until next month. He closed the wallet and set it beside the bowl. 800. He did the math without meaning to. The checking account, the power bill, the prescription refill, the paper from the orthopedic surgeon still clipped to the fridge with a magnet from Niagara Falls. $3,500 after insurance. He had read that number so many times it no longer looked real. Dad? Walter swallowed. Of course, sweetheart. Sarah let out a breath, quick and light, like someone setting down a box they had been carrying too long. Really? Sure. You don't know how much this helps. He nodded to himself. The rain came down harder. Somewhere upstairs, the old house answered with a soft creak. Walter glanced toward the dark hallway that led to the staircase. He had not been up there in 3 days. Laundry could wait. The guest room could collect dust. At night, he slept in the recliner more often than the bed now, because getting down was easier than getting up, and because the stairs had started to feel like something meant for another man. Sarah was talking again, filling the space with details now that the hard part was over. Tom had picked up extra shifts. Eli had missed school on Tuesday. Maddie needed new shoes because kids grew like weeds. Walter listened and made the right sounds at the right times. He wanted to say, I miss you. The words rose all the way to his throat and stayed there. Instead, he said, kids grow fast. They really do. He looked at the spoon on the floor and thought about asking when she might visit. The last time Sarah brought the kids to Pittsburgh, Eli still needed help tying his shoes. Walter had shown him twice, and Eli had said, Mom says we can just buy the kind with Velcro. He tightened his grip on the phone. Sarah? Yeah? He opened his mouth. Come see me. I can't keep climbing the stairs. I think I'm getting smaller in this house. Nothing, he said. Never mind. She did not press. For a second, all he could hear was the television on her end and rain on his. Then Sarah softened her voice. You sure you're okay, Dad? Walter looked down at his swollen knee under the table. Even through the fabric of his pants, the joint looked wrong. Thick. Angry, old. Same as last week, sweetheart, he said. Same as last year. She laughed a little, like he had made a joke. Yeah, she said, and I know the feeling. Walter let that sit between them. He wondered what would happen if he told the truth just once. That some mornings he stood at the bottom of the stairs and stared at them like they were a cliff. That he kept a pillow and blanket in the living room now. That he had been putting off surgery for 2 years because there always seemed to be a better reason to spend the money. But Sarah was already moving toward goodbye. He could hear it in her voice. She had what she called for. I should go check on Eli, she said. Can you send it tonight? Walter's eyes closed for a moment. Yes? Through Zelle? Yes. Thank you, Dad. He ran his finger along the wet ring the soup bowl had left on the table. You don't have to hate it, he said. Just ask. There was a pause on the other end this time. Still, Sarah said, thank you. Walter stared at the wall calendar near the fridge. April. A photo of a maple tree in some state park, full red leaves against a white sky. He had never been there. The picture looked too bright to be real. Then Sarah said, love you, Dad. Walter's hand tightened around the phone until his knuckles paled. Love you too. He sat very still after saying it, listening to the silence that followed. Not long enough to mean anything. Just a beat. Just enough to make him wonder who had lied more cleanly. Then she was gone. The screen went dark in his hand. Walter did not move right away. The kitchen felt larger after the call, larger and emptier, as if her voice had briefly filled it and then taken warmth with it when it left. Rain ticked against the window. The soup smelled faintly of salt and tin. He bent slowly, bracing one palm against the chair and picked up the spoon from the floor. By the time he straightened, his knee was shaking. He set the spoon in the sink and reached for his phone again. The banking app opened with a face he barely recognized in the black reflection of the screen. His reading glasses were in the living room. He squinted, thumb hovering over the transfer amount. $800. He could send it in 10 seconds. Instead, he locked the phone and laid it down. The silence pressed in. Walter pushed himself up from the chair and made his careful way to the living room. The lamp beside the recliner cast a soft yellow circle over the side table, over the stack of unopened mail, over the framed photograph that always sat turned slightly toward his seat. Sarah at 5 years old. He picked up the frame with both hands. In the picture, she was missing one front tooth and grinning so hard her eyes nearly disappeared. Her hair was crooked because he had tried to cut her bangs himself and failed. She wore a paper flower crown from kindergarten, pink and purple construction paper taped together at the back. Walter lowered himself into the recliner with a sharp breath through his nose. He touched the glass over her face, just once, with the tip of his finger. Hey, Peanut, he murmured. The room, of course, said nothing back, but his mouth softened anyway. For a moment, he could almost feel the solid little weight of her leaning against him on the couch, asking if maple trees hurt when their leaves fell off. He had told her no. Trees knew how to let things go. Walter looked down at the photo a while longer, then set it back exactly where it had been. On the side table sat a folded paper from Allegheny Orthopedic Associates. He did not need to open it to know what it said. Pre-op clearance, coverage estimate, payment options. The words had started to sound almost polite in his head, as if pain were a subscription he simply had not canceled yet. He reached for the phone again. This time he opened Zelle. Send money, Sarah Henderson. $800. He typed it in carefully, then stopped at the final screen. Outside, a car hissed past on the wet street. Walter stared at the number. He could still back out. He could call her back and say he had to wait a week. He could say the truth in pieces, if not all at once. Sarah, I need surgery. Sarah, I can't keep doing this. Sarah, I'm scared. His thumb pressed send. Payment complete. Walter let out a breath he had not known he was holding. Then he checked the account balance. $4,200 remaining. He stared at it until the numbers blurred. $3,500 after insurance. He had asked 3 times in case someone had made a mistake. $3,500 to fix the knee. 2 years of postponing. 2 years of saying maybe after winter, maybe after Sarah gets caught up, maybe after the next thing. He set the phone face down on the table. Rain filled the house with its soft, endless sound. Walter leaned back and looked at the ceiling. A water stain near the corner had spread into the shape of a crooked flower. He had meant to fix that too. His knee pulsed. His chest felt hollowed out. In the kitchen, the untouched soup was cooling into jelly. Walter folded one hand over the other on his stomach and shut his eyes. Sleep would not come. He knew that already. Above him, the house settled deeper into night. And in that long, wet silence, Walter felt an old memory begin to stir. Small at first, then sharper. The first time he had handed his daughter money and watched gratitude take the place of something he had wanted much more. The bike. At 2 in the morning, Walter was still awake. The living room lamp was off now. Only the blue light from the cable box touched the walls. It made the furniture look flatter than it was, as if the room had been pressed between pages. Rain still moved against the windows, now and then, softer than before. Walter sat half-folded in the recliner with a blanket over his lap and one shoe still on. He had meant to take it off. He had meant to try the stairs again. But when he stood up an hour ago, his knee had buckled so sharply he had grabbed the arm of the chair and sunk back down before he hit the floor. So he stayed there. The house smelled faintly of cold soup. He rubbed his hand over his face and closed his eyes. But the dark behind them did not stay empty for long. It shifted, opened, became another room, another year. 1999. The church had smelled like lilies and wet wool. Sarah was 12 and too quiet. She stood beside him in a black dress that had belonged to a cousin. Her hands twisted together so tightly her knuckles looked pale. People kept bending down to speak to her in soft voices, the kind adults used when they wanted credit for kindness. She nodded at all of them, once, twice, 10 times. Walter could not remember a single face now, only the sound of shoes on tile and someone crying 3 pews back. His wife's casket stood at the front under a spray of white flowers. Sarah looked at it as if it might still change its mind. Walter had wanted to put a hand on her shoulder. He remembered that part clearly, the wanting. He had even lifted his arm a little. Then someone from the funeral home had stepped between them, saying something about the guest book. And by the time the man moved away, Walter's hand was back at his side. Sarah's mouth had started to shake. Walter had seen it. He had seen the way she bit the inside of her cheek and tried not to cry in front of people. He had known she was losing the fight. He had not known what to do. He had been 32 years old, broad-shouldered, employed, paying the mortgage on time, with a daughter who still needed help with fractions. He had known how to replace a water heater, how to file insurance paperwork, how to work double shifts without complaining, how to keep casseroles from spoiling in the fridge. He had not known how to look at his child while her mother lay in a box. Sarah made one small sound, barely more than a breath catching wrong. Walter turned to her then. Her eyes were full, not spilling yet, just full. He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. A woman from Linda's side of the family walked over and wrapped Sarah in both arms. Sarah folded into her at once, finally crying, her face pressed into the woman's coat. Walter stood beside them with his hands hanging useless at his seat. Later that week, he took Sarah to buy a bike. He had told himself she needed something good, something solid, something new. Kids needed motion after grief, air, a way to get out of the house. He believed all of that enough to say it aloud. The bike shop smelled like rubber tires and metal. Rows of bicycles gleamed under fluorescent lights. Red, blue, silver, black. Sarah walked beside him with her shoulders slumped forward and her hair unbrushed. She had stopped crying in public by then, which somehow felt worse. A salesman in a polo shirt asked what they were looking for. Something nice, Walter said. Sarah stopped in front of a red bike with white handles. It was simple, smaller than the others. Not cheap, but not the most expensive either. That one's pretty, she said. Walter looked past it immediately. This one's better. He pointed at a larger bike with more gears, thicker tires, a shinier frame. It was the most expensive one in the row. Blue, not red. The kind of bike he imagined a good father bought when life had been unfair. The salesman nodded with approval. That's a great choice. Sarah stared at the blue bike, then back at the red one. I like the red one. Walter had already reached for the price tag on the blue. This one will last longer. She said nothing. The salesman started talking about quality and value and suspension. Walter listened like it mattered. He nodded in the right places. He asked 1 or 2 questions. He signed the slip with a hand that did not shake. When it was done, they stood outside near the truck with the bike in the bed. The sky had the washed-out look of early spring. Cars moved past on the road in soft, steady lines. Sarah stood with both arms hanging at her sides. She did not look at the bike. Walter put a hand on the metal frame. There, he said, best one they had. Sarah turned toward him. Her face was blotchy from crying again, though he had not even seen when it started. I don't want a bike, Dad, she said. Walter went still. I want Mom. The words did not come out loud. That was the worst part. She said them in a tired, flat voice, like she had run out of room for anything bigger. Traffic hissed by on the street. Walter looked at her, then at the bike, then at the truck. He could still feel the pen in his hand, the receipt in his pocket. After a long second, he reached for the passenger side door and opened it for her. "Come on," he said. "Let's go home." Sarah got in without another word. That was the first time. Not the first time he loved her. Not the first time he failed her. But the first time he offered money-shaped comfort and accepted the silence that followed as if it were good enough. Walter's eyes opened. The living room came back slowly. The dark TV, the low table, the blanket over his knees. His right leg had gone numb from sitting the wrong way. When he shifted, pain flashed sharp and white through the joint. He caught his breath through his teeth. A knock sounded at the front door. Walter frowned and looked toward the hallway. Another knock came, then the rattle of the knob, then a voice. "Walt, you dead in there or just ignoring me?" "Carl." Walter glanced at the clock on the cable box. 9:14. Morning then. He must have drifted off sometime before dawn. He pushed the blanket away and tried to stand. His knee argued immediately. He braced himself on the chair arm and waited it out, jaw tight, before making his way to the door. Carl stood on the porch in a denim jacket with a paper bag under one arm and rain darkening the shoulders of his coat. He was the same age as Walter and somehow still looked built for trouble. His gray hair stuck up in the back. His face had the permanent irritation of a man who cared too much to be pleasant about it. "You look awful," Carl said as he stepped inside. "Good morning to you too." Carl held up the bag. "Turkey sandwich, apple, and don't act touched. My wife made extra." Walter shut the door. Carl stopped in the hallway and looked toward the recliner, the blanket, the lamp still on, the untouched room. "You slept there?" Walter kept walking, and I sat there. Carl made a sound in his throat that meant liar. In the kitchen, Walter filled the kettle from the sink. Carl set the bag down and leaned against the counter, watching him. "How's the leg?" "Fine." Carl's eyebrows went up. "That why you walk like a shopping cart with one bad wheel?" Walter kept his eyes on the kettle. "It's acting up." "Acting up." Walter plugged it in. Carl crossed his arms. "When's your surgery?" Walter opened a cabinet and took out 2 mugs, though he already regretted the weight of the second one. "Haven't scheduled it." Carl stared at him. "You said that in January." Walter set the mugs on the counter more carefully than he meant to. Things came up. Carl looked at him for another beat, then passed him to the fridge, to the paper clipped there, to the estimate Walter had forgotten to take down. "Things named Sarah?" Carl asked. Walter said nothing. The kettle began its low pre-boil hum. Carl's voice lost some of its edge. "She called again?" Walter reached for the tea bags. "She needed help." "Of course she did." "That's not fair." Carl barked out a short laugh. "No, tell me the fair part then." Walter dropped the tea bags into the mugs. "Her kid's sick. The car needs work. Tom's pulling night shifts. And your knee needs cutting open." Walter looked up then. Carl held his gaze. He did not look angry now. That was somehow worse. The kettle clicked off. Walter poured the water. Steam rose between them. Carl nodded toward the living room. "How long were you stuck in that chair?" "I wasn't stuck." "You want me to ask the chair?" Walter set the kettle down too hard. A little water splashed over his fingers. Carl sighed and pulled out a kitchen chair. "Sit. I'm making tea. You made tea. Sit before you fall over." Walter wanted to object. Instead, he sat. Carl took the other chair and pushed the paper bag across the table. "Eat. You look like a skeleton." Walter opened the bag. The sandwich was cut in half, wrapped in wax paper. Mustard smell. Good bread. He had not realized he was hungry until then. He took one bite. Carl waited until he swallowed. "When's the last time Sarah visited?" Walter reached for the tea instead of answering. Carl's eyes narrowed. "Walt." Walter looked down into the cup. The teabag string clung to the side like a wet thread. 3 years, he said. Carl leaned back slowly. 3? Walter nodded once. Jesus. She has the kids. So do a lot of people. It's a long drive. So fi. She doesn't like flying. Carl rubbed both hands over his face. You hear yourself? Walter took another bite of sandwich and chewed longer than necessary. Carl pointed at him. You do this every time. I ask a straight question and you hand me excuses like coupons. Walter set the sandwich down. She's busy, he said. Carl looked at him for a long moment. Then he spoke more quietly. And what are you? Walter did not answer. Carl leaned forward, forearms on the table. You need to talk to her, not about money, about you. Walter gave a tired shake of his head. What's that gonna do? Maybe let your daughter know you're a human being. Walter looked past him out the window over the sink. The rain had stopped. The street was wet and gray. Across the road, a small maple tree in the neighbor's yard moved lightly in the wind. I provided for her, Walter said, and that's what fathers do. Carl did not blink. No, Walt. That's what banks do." He tapped the table once. "Fathers show up." The words landed hard. Walter's fingers tightened around the mug. Heat pressed into his palm, but he barely felt it. "I showed up," he said. Carl gave him a look that held no comfort in it. "Did you?" Walter's mouth opened, then closed. Carl glanced toward the living room where the framed photo sat on the side table. She was, 12 when Linda died? Walter looked away. Carl nodded to himself, like he had gotten the answer anyway. "And you started buying things." Walter did not ask how he knew. Maybe he had told him once, years ago. Maybe Carl had simply watched long enough. There were men who hid badly, and men who hid so long they started believing they were invisible. Walter had become the second kind. "She needed things," Walter said. "She needed her mother." "I know that." "She needed her father too." Walter flinched just a little. Carl saw it. Of course he did. He was the sort of man who noticed where people kept their bruises. "I did my best," Walter said. Carl's expression softened for the first time that morning, but his voice did not. "I know you did. That's the tragedy." Walter looked down at the table. A crumb sat near his wrist. He pushed it with one finger and watched it break in half. Carl let the silence sit a little longer, then said, "You're not afraid of losing her." Walter lifted his eyes. Carl met them evenly. "You're afraid of finding out you already lost her years ago." Walter's chest tightened. It felt almost like the start of a cough, except nothing came up. "That's not true," he said, but there was no force in it. Carl stood, carried his mug to the sink, and rinsed it without asking. He had been in this house often enough to stop pretending to be polite. At the sink, he said, "Maybe it is. Maybe it isn't. But right now, you're helping her stay comfortable, not knowing you at all." Walter sat very still. Carl turned off the faucet and looked back at him. "Call the doctor," he said. "Schedule the surgery, and call your daughter like you mean it, not like you're paying a bill." Walter managed a dry smile that did not last. "You make everything sound easy." Carl snorted. "Nothing about you is easy." He grabbed his jacket from the chair back. At the door, he paused and glanced over one shoulder. "I'll come by tomorrow," he said. "If you don't answer, I'm using the spare key." "You don't have a spare key?" Carl patted his pocket. "Then I guess you should start locking less and living more." Walter almost smiled again. Almost. After Carl left, the house became quiet in a different way. Not empty, disturbed. Walter stood at the sink for a while, staring at the wet bottom of Carl's mug. Then he carried his own cup to the living room and sat back down in the recliner, though now it felt less like shelter and more like evidence. On the side table, his phone waited. He picked it up. The message thread with Sarah opened to a line of blue and gray bubbles, mostly practical things. "Thanks again, Dad. Can you zell it? Maddie lost her backpack. Sorry I missed your call. Happy birthday, Dad. Hope you do something fun." Walter read them all the way back farther than he meant to. No fights, no cruelty, nothing sharp enough to point at and say that was the break. Just years of skimming along the surface. He tapped the message field. "I miss you." The words appeared in black letters. Simple. Bare. Too bare. Walter stared at them until his throat tightened. Then he hit delete. The box emptied. He typed again. "How are the kids?" He looked at that one too. Safe. Light. A sideways version of what he wanted to ask. He could send that. She would answer. Probably with a photo. Probably with a short update. Probably with enough to keep the distance looking normal for another few weeks. Walter pressed his thumb against the screen, then deleted that too. The message field went blank again. In the quiet room, the old house creaked once overhead. His knee pulsed. Outside, the maple tree across the street moved in the wind, thin branches lifting and settling, as if waving to no one. Walter set the phone face down on his chest and leaned his head back. Carl was wrong about one thing. He was afraid of losing her. But Carl was right about the part underneath. Walter already knew, somewhere deep and stubborn, that the loss had not happened all at once. It had happened slowly, in bike shops, in clipped phone calls, in all the moments when he had handed over help and held back himself. He closed his eyes. The next time Sarah called, he would try something different. Not no. Not yet. But not yes in the first 10 seconds either. For the first time in a long while, the thought scared him enough to matter. The test. The cat showed up 3 days after the fall. A stray, gray and thin, with one torn ear and eyes that had seen too much. Walter started leaving out a bowl of tuna, then a box with an old towel. The cat stayed. He named her Sarah, not because she reminded him of his daughter, because he needed somewhere to put the name, to say it out loud without the silence that followed. "Sarah," he said Sunday morning, setting down a small can of wet food on the back porch. The cat rubbed against his shin, his bad knee. He didn't flinch. "You're the only woman in my life who shows up when I call." The phone rang. Walter straightened slowly. His knee cracked. He looked at the caller ID before he picked up. Sarah. The cat stopped eating and looked at him. Hello? Dad? Her voice was tight, the way it got when something broke. The washing machine. It just waters everywhere. The basement's flooding. Walter leaned against the doorframe. Outside, the morning was pale and quiet. A Sunday. Church bells somewhere. I'm sorry, sweetheart, that sounds hard. A pause. He could hear her breathing, waiting. Dad? Yeah. The water's rising. She stopped, started again. Can you help? Walter looked at the cat. The cat looked back. He thought about last week, about the phone call where he said, fine, when he wasn't fine. About Carl's voice. Father's show up. Can we just talk first? Walter said. How are the kids? Dad? How's Tommy's asthma? Did the new inhaler help? They're fine, Dad, the water. How's Emily? She started kindergarten, right? How's that going? Sarah exhaled. He could hear the impatience, the way her breath hitched when she wanted to scream but couldn't. They're fine. Everyone's fine. The basement is not fine. Please. Walter closed his eyes. The cat meowed. How are you? He asked. Not the kids, not the house. You. Silence, a long one. He counted. 4 seconds, 7, 10. I'm tired, Dad, she said finally. Her voice cracked, just a little. I'm really tired, and I really need $400, please. Walter opened his eyes. The cat had gone back to eating. He watched her pink tongue lap at the wet food. She was so thin. He'd been feeding her for 4 days, and she was still thin. I miss you, Sarah. The words came out before he could stop them. They sat in the air between Pittsburgh and wherever she was. 400 miles, a lifetime. Another silence, longer this time. I miss you too. Her voice was softer now. Almost the voice she had as a child, almost. But I really need... I know. Walter reached for his wallet. It sat on the kitchen counter next to the photo of her at 5 years old. The one where she was missing 2 front teeth and holding a dandelion like it was a flower from a palace. How much? 400. 400, he repeated, like saying it twice would make it smaller. Just until next month, I swear, the car's almost paid off and then... You don't have to explain. But I want to. I don't want you to think... I don't think anything, sweetheart. He opened the wallet, looked at the bills, 20s, 50s, a single hundred. I just miss you. I'll call more, I will. Okay. I mean it. I know. He pulled out the 100, then 3 20s, then another 100. Counted. 400 exactly. The numbers didn't add up to, I love you. They never did. Dad? Yeah. The Zelle info is still the same. I remember. He opened the app, typed her name, her number, the amount. His thumb hovered over send. Dad? Yeah. I love you. Walter looked at the cat. The cat had finished eating and was now washing her face, one paw at a time, like she had all the time in the world. I love you too, sweetheart. He pressed send. Then he typed again, a message separate from the money. I love you. Call me when you're not in crisis. I just want to hear your voice. His thumb hovered again, then pressed send again. On the phone, Sarah was still talking. I'll pay you back. Maybe not next month, but the month after. Tommy's teacher said he might need a tutor for reading and... Sarah. Yeah? Just call me, that's all. A pause. Okay. Now when you need something, just to talk. Okay, Dad. Promise? Another pause. He could hear her children in the background. Emily whining about something. Tommy crying. The sound of a life he wasn't part of. I promise, she said. But her voice had already drifted. He could hear her moving, walking toward the noise. I gotta go. The water's probably ruining the drywall. Okay. Thanks, Dad, really. I know. Love you. Love you too. The line went dead. Walter stood in the kitchen. The phone felt heavy in his hand. He looked at the message he'd sent. I just want to hear your voice. His phone buzzed. Thanks, Dad. I'll call soon. Soon. He knew what soon meant. It meant next time the water rises. It meant next time the car breaks. It meant next time I need $400, and you're the only one who still says yes. The cat meowed from the porch. Walter walked to the back door, favoring his good leg. He leaned against the frame and looked at the gray sky. No sun. Just clouds that looked like they might rain or might not. The kind of morning that couldn't decide what it wanted to be. You want to know something, Sarah? He said to the cat. The cat blinked. I think I just paid $400 for a promise neither of us believes. He slid down the door frame until he was sitting on the porch. His knee screamed. He ignored it. The cat walked over and climbed into his lap, curling into a tight ball. Her bones pressed against his thighs. She was so thin. Walter put his hand on her back, felt her breathe in, out, in, out. You're the only one who stays, he whispered. The phone didn't ring again. He sat there until the clouds decided. They chose rain. The fall. Walter woke to pain before he understood where he was. The living room was dark except for the faint yellow glow of the street lamp outside. The TV had turned itself off hours ago. His blanket had slipped to the floor. His right knee throbbed in heavy, deep pulses, and now his back hurt too from the angle of the recliner. He blinked toward the clock on the cable box. 1:47 a.m. For a few seconds he stayed still, hoping the pain would settle if he did not challenge it. It did not. His knee felt swollen and hot. His shoulder ached. Even his jaw was tight from sleeping wrong. His pills were upstairs. Walter let his head fall back and stared at the ceiling. He should wait until morning. He knew that. He had known it the last 3 nights too. But the pills downstairs were gone, and the refill bottle sat in the bathroom cabinet beside his toothbrush. He had meant to bring it down yesterday, or the day before. He pushed the blanket away and sat forward slowly. Pain shot through his legs so fast his hand flew to the arm of the chair. He waited, breathed, tried again. The room tilted for a second when he stood. He grabbed the side table until it steadied. His phone lay there beside the lamp, face down, close enough to touch. He looked at it, then away. Just the stairs, he told himself, up and back down, 2 minutes. The house was silent as he crossed the living room. At the bottom of the staircase, he stopped and looked up. The steps disappeared into shadow. He hated how narrow they seemed at night. Hated that he had started treating them like weather. Something to fear, something to measure, something that could turn on him without warning. Walter put one hand on the railing and lifted his foot to the first step. The knee nearly gave. He caught himself, breathed through it, then tried again more carefully. First step, then second, then third. By the fourth, sweat had broken across his back. He planted his good foot, shifted his weight, and reached higher on the railing. The sock on his bad foot slid. It happened so fast he did not understand it till he was already falling. His hand lost the rail. His shoulder slammed the wall. His leg twisted under him with a sick, hot snap of pain that emptied the air from his lungs. Then his body hit the stairs and slid hard to the landing below. For one bright second, the whole house vanished. There was only pain. Walter's mouth opened, but nothing came out. His chest locked. His vision flashed white around the edges. He tried to breathe and could not. Not fully, not enough. He lay twisted on the floor at the bottom of the stairs, one arm trapped under him, his bad leg stretched at the wrong angle. The silence that followed was awful. No footsteps overhead. No voice calling down, no rush of someone coming to help. Just the sound of his own ragged breathing and the old heater clicking somewhere in the walls. Walter squeezed his eyes shut and waited for the worst of it to pass. It did not pass, it only changed shape. The sharpness in his knee became something deeper, heavier. His hip burned. His shoulder throbbed where it had hit the wall. His mouth tasted like metal. When he tried to move his leg, nausea surged so hard he had to stop. He stayed there. Minutes passed, or maybe longer. Time had gone strange. The hallway clock was behind him. He could not see it. At some point, he rolled onto his back and stared up at the dark line of the staircase. The railing cast thin shadows on the wall. He thought of shouting, but the nearest neighbor was across the yard and the windows were shut against the cold. Even if they heard, what then? An old man yelling in the middle of the night. Maybe they'd think television. Maybe they'd think dream. He let his head turn toward the living room. From where he lay, he could just see the edge of the lamp table. His phone was there. 3 yards, maybe less. It might as well have been across a river. Walter swallowed and tried to push himself up with his elbows. Pain shot from his knee to his stomach. He dropped back to the floor with a rough sound he barely recognized as his own. He pressed the heel of his hand over his mouth until it passed. The house remained still around him. No call, no text, no headlights in the driveway. At some point, he began to shiver. The hardwood floor pulled heat out of him through his shirt. His hand had gone numb where it was pinned wrong under his side. He dragged it free inch by inch and tucked it against his chest. He thought of Sarah, not as she was now, voiced through a phone, always half turned towards something else. He thought of her at 8, feverish and damp-haired, calling for him from the couch. He had come at once then, sat beside her, held a cool washcloth to her forehead, checked her temperature every hour. Back then, if she cried at night, he went. Walter opened his eyes and stared at the ceiling above the hallway. No one was coming. The thought did not arrive all at once. It settled slowly with each stretch of silence. With each minute, the phone stayed on the table and the front door stayed shut. He must have drifted in and out because when he next focused on the darkness, the street lamp outside had shifted slightly, laying a different bar of pale light across the wall. His throat was dry, his back ached. His whole body smelled faintly sour with sweat. He rolled onto one elbow. This time, he did not try to stand. He pulled. 1 inch, stop, breathe. Another inch. The pain in his knee was blinding, but it had changed again too. Not better. Just distant around the edges, as if his body had understood there was no point in screaming at full volume for this long. Walter dragged himself across the floor toward the living room. His left hand clawed at the wood. His right leg trailed behind him. Every movement left him panting. Twice he had to stop and rest his forehead against the floorboards until the dizziness passed. At the edge of the rug, his hand slipped. He cursed softly, the word breaking apart in his dry mouth. Then he kept going. When his fingers finally struck the leg of the side table, relief hit so hard he almost cried from that alone. He reached up blindly. The lamp. A stack of mail. His glasses. Then the phone. It slid against his fingertips, almost away, and Walter made a desperate sound in his throat and caught it with both hands. The screen lit his face, blue-white. 4:03 a.m. More than 6 hours had passed. Walter stared at the numbers until they blurred, then hit the emergency call screen with a shaking thumb. The operator answered on the second ring. 911, what is your emergency? Walter swallowed. His voice came out thin and rough. I fell, he said. I think I hurt my leg. I can't get up. What is your address, sir? He told her. Are you alone? Walter looked at the empty room, the dark hallway, the front door locked from the inside. Yes, stay on the line for me. Help is on the way. Walter listened to her steady voice while distant sirens began to rise somewhere far off. She told him not to try to stand, asked if he had hit his head, asked if he could unlock the door. I can crawl, he said. Only if you can do it safely. Walter looked at the few feet between him and the deadbolt. He did not answer right away. He ended up dragging himself there, too. By the time he reached the door and turned the lock, his shirt was sticking to his back. He left the door cracked open and slid down beside it until the lights flashed blue and red across the wet front steps. The paramedics came in fast, all business, their boots squeaking faintly on the floor. They lifted him, asked questions, fitted a brace around his leg, moved him onto the stretcher. Walter answered where he could. Pain made the room pulse in and out. As they wheeled him toward the door, his phone rested on his chest. He looked at it once. Then, before he could think better of it, he opened Sarah's contact and pressed call. The line rang. Once, twice, 3 times, 4. On the 5th, she answered. Dad? Her voice was thick with sleep, confused. A child murmured faintly in the background. It's 4 in the morning, she said. What happened? Walter looked up at the dark porch ceiling moving over him as the stretcher rolled outside. I fell, he said, and I'm going to the hospital. There was a pause. Not long. Just long enough for him to hear her waking up on the other end. Is it bad? The cold air hit his face as the paramedics carried him to the ambulance. Walter watched his own front door swing wider, then settle back. I don't know yet. Another pause. Then Sarah inhaled softly, as if bracing herself. I can't come, Dad. The kids, Walter shut his eyes. For a second, he saw it all with terrible clarity. Sarah in her kitchen, one hand over her forehead, already counting obstacles. The drive, the children, school drop-off, Tom's shifts, the 1,000 small practical reasons that had always stood where feeling should have been. He had spent 23 years teaching her that love arrived as money, as solutions, as transfers completed before midnight. Not as presence, not as hands, not as a body in the room. Now, in the dark before dawn, she gave him back exactly what he had taught her. Not cruelty, not indifference exactly, just absence shaped like responsibility. Walter opened his eyes. The ambulance doors were open now, waiting. I know, sweetheart, he said. Dad, I'm sorry, I can't just pack up the kids at 4 in the morning. I know. You understand? A paramedic reached for the rails on the stretcher. Walter looked up at the pale beginning of dawn pressing faintly behind the clouds. I'm starting to, he said. Sarah was quiet. He could hear her breathing, could hear far behind her the soft electronic chirp of some kitchen appliance, life already moving around her. Her own life, the one he had always told her to protect, to build, to choose first. Call me when you know more, she said at last. I will. Okay. Walter waited, maybe for one more sentence, one that did not come. Then the call ended. Inside the ambulance, everything smelled clean and cold. A paramedic strapped him in and asked about allergies. Walter answered automatically. His phone stayed in his hand until they reached the hospital. The emergency room lights were too bright. They rolled him through sliding doors, through questions, through clipped voices and paper wristbands and the ache of being moved from stretcher to bed. Someone cut his pant leg. Someone else pressed carefully around his knee while Walter stared at a ceiling tile with a brown watermark in one corner. Time lost its edges again. At some point, they gave him something for the pain. Not enough to erase it, only to move it farther away. Enough that he could breathe without counting. The room they finally left him in was small and cold. Curtains half drawn, machines quiet. Dawn pressing gray against a narrow window. Walter lay flat on the hospital bed and looked at the chair in the corner. Empty. His phone sat on the blanket near his hip. No new messages. No missed calls. He turned his head toward the wall. A nurse came in a little later, Hispanic, maybe in her 40s, with tired eyes and a warm face. Her badge read Maria. She checked his IV, adjusted his blanket, and glanced at the monitor. "How are we doing, Mr. Henderson?" Walter let out a breath that almost sounded like a laugh. "Poorly." That got a small smile from her. "Fair enough." She moved with quiet confidence, not rushed even though the hallway outside sounded busy. When she finished, she started toward the door, then paused. "Do you want me to call someone?" Walter looked at the chair again, at the empty place where someone might have sat. His mouth opened, then closed. Maria waited. Finally he said, "I don't think anyone would come." The words hung there between them, plain and unprotected. Maria did not flinch. She did not fill the room with cheerful lies either. She just came back to the bed and pulled the chair closer. "Well," she said, sitting down, "then I can stay a minute." Walter turned his face away too late. His eyes had already filled. He hated that. Hated crying in front of strangers. Hated that it came now, after the fall, after the ambulance, after the phone call that had somehow hurt worse than the stairs. Maria reached out and rested her hand lightly over his. That was all. No speech, no pity face, no asking him to explain. Walter's throat worked once. Then the tears came quietly anyway, sliding sideways into his hairline. Maria stayed. For 3 hours in pieces, she came and went and came back again. She brought ice chips, adjusted his pillow, asked if he needed water. Once, when the pain spiked during an exam and Walter shut his eyes so hard his forehead wrinkled, she stood beside the bed and let him hold her hand until it passed. Outside the window, morning rose fully, hospital sounds sharpened, carts rolled by. Phones rang. Somewhere a child cried and was hushed. By late morning, Walter had learned enough to understand that nothing was broken, but he had torn something badly and made everything worse. Surgery would be discussed again. Physical therapy, recovery time, restrictions. He listened, nodded, signed where they told him. When the room emptied for a while, he reached for his phone. Sarah's name sat near the top of the screen. He looked at it a long time. The old reflex was still there. Call her. Reassure her. Make it easier. Tell her it was not so bad. Tell her she did not need to worry. Tell her the doctor was optimistic. Tell her what she needed in order to go on with her day. His thumb hovered over her name, then lowered. Walter turned the phone over and set it face down on the blanket. For the first time, he did not call. Outside his narrow window, the sky over Pittsburgh had cleared to a thin, colorless blue. Somewhere beyond the parking lot, beyond the hospital, beyond the wet streets and rows of brick houses, the city was carrying on. Walter lay still and watched the light move slowly across the wall. Something had changed. Not enough, not yet, but enough that silence no longer felt like waiting. The account? 3 days later, Walter came home with a knee brace, a paper bag full of prescriptions, and a limp that had turned slower and meaner. The house smelled closed up. Old soup. Dust. The faint hospital scent still clinging to his clothes. Carl had driven him back, carried in the pharmacy bag, and stood in the hallway long enough to make sure Walter could get to the recliner without falling. "You call if you need anything," Carl had said. Walter had nodded. Carl had looked like he wanted to say more, then only pointed 2 fingers at Walter's chest and left. Now the house was quiet again. Walter lowered himself into the recliner with both hands gripping the arms. The brace made his leg feel heavier than it was. His whole body seemed arranged around not bending the knee too much. A gray cat jumped onto his lap before he had fully settled. "Easy, easy," Walter muttered. The cat ignored him and turned twice in a small circle, then lay down across the good side of his thighs as if she had paid the mortgage. Her name was Sarah. He had found her under his porch 10 years ago, all ribs and rainwater, and kept the name because by then it already hurt in a way he understood. He scratched behind her ears. The cat closed her eyes and began to purr. Walter leaned his head back for a moment and stared at the ceiling. The discharge papers sat on the side table beside his glasses. Physical therapy instructions, a follow-up appointment. A highlighted paragraph about surgery options if the joint did not improve. Walter let out a breath through his nose. Then he reached for the brown envelope from the bank. It had been sitting unopened on the table since before the fall. The cat lifted her head when the paper crackled. Walter slid the envelope open and pulled out the monthly statement. Then he reached for a pen in the back of an old electric bill. He had $4,200 left. He wrote it down. His handwriting looked worse than usual, smaller, less certain. He opened the pharmacy bag and checked the labels one by one. Pain medication, anti-inflammatory, blood thinner. He wrote again. $200 a month for medicine. $900 for the house. About $300 for food if he was careful. Utilities, gas, phone, odds and ends. He added them in, then stared at the numbers until they stopped feeling real and turned into marks on paper. The surgery estimate sat folded under the bank statement. He opened that too. $3,500 out of pocket after insurance. Walter looked from one paper to the other. If he paid for the surgery, he would have $700 left. $700. Not enough for another emergency. Not enough for Sarah if she called. Not enough for much of anything except a few quiet weeks of pretending not to be scared. The cat kneaded once against his leg, claws catching lightly through the blanket. Walter did not move her. If he did not have the surgery, he already knew the rest. He would keep limping from chair to sink, sink to bathroom, bathroom back to chair. He would keep sleeping downstairs, keep measuring pain in the length of staircases and grocery aisles, keep waiting until one bad step turned into something worse. But if he kept the money, there would still be something for Sarah. A car repair, rent, school clothes, medicine for one of the kids. A $1,000 problem, then another, then another. He knew the pattern by heart now. Trouble came for her like weather, and Walter, even now, still wanted to be the roof. He set the pen down and rubbed both hands over his face. The cat opened one eye at him, offended by the movement. Walter looked again at the papers spread on the table. His leg or Sarah, pain or usefulness, his own body or the old familiar hope that the next transfer might somehow mean more than the last one. He picked up the phone and called Carl. Carl answered on the second ring. Well, Carl said, that either means you need help or, you're finally becoming pleasant. Which is it? Walter almost smiled. I'm looking at my account. Silence on the other end for a beat. That bad? Walter looked down at the numbers. Worse when they're written out. Carl did not speak right away. Walter could picture him leaning one shoulder against the kitchen counter in his own house, face pinched, waiting for the truth instead of rescuing him from it. I've got $4,200, Walter said. The surgery's $3,500. And the pills are $200 a month. Mortgage is $900. Food's about $300. I can stretch some of it, but... He stopped. Carl finished it for him. But if Sarah calls, you want something left. Walter looked at the cat on his lap. Yes. Carl let out a long breath. Walt. Walter waited. Then Carl said, you're choosing between your leg and her love. That's not a choice. That's a hostage situation. Walter's hand tightened around the edge of the statement. The words landed hard because they were ugly, and because they were true in a way he did not want to admit. I'm not buying love, Walter said, but even to himself it sounded thin. No, then what are you doing? Walter stared at the surgery paper until the black print blurred. She needs help. And you need a body that works. Walter said nothing. Carl's voice sharpened. You fall down those stairs again, you may not get back up next time. Walter looked toward the staircase, visible from the recliner. Quiet, narrow, waiting. I know. No, I don't think you do. The cat shifted, then settled deeper against him. Her purring filled the space between Walter's ribs like a second, smaller heart. Carl spoke again, quieter now. You're not helping her if you destroy yourself to keep the pattern going. Walter turned the pen between his fingers. Outside, the afternoon light had gone pale. Wind moved across the front yard. He could see the empty patch of dirt near the walkway, where Linda used to say they should plant something someday. A tree, maybe, a maple. Something that would still be there after the house got old. She'll think I'm abandoning her, Walter said. Carl was silent for a moment. Maybe she'll think you're a person. Walter's throat moved once. After they hung up, the house felt too tight. He folded the papers, unfolded them, then folded them again. The cat jumped down when he leaned forward. Walter sat there a while longer, looking out the front window at the patch of earth by the walkway. An hour later, moving slower than he liked and hurting more than he expected, he drove to the garden center 3 miles away. He almost turned around twice. The place smelled like damp soil and fertilizer. Rows of spring flowers glowed under the overhang. Yellow pansies, white petunias, trays of red geraniums. Walter moved past them with the metal cart squeaking under one hand. At the far end of the lot stood the young trees. He stopped in front of a small maple, no taller than his shoulder. Its trunk was thin. Its leaves were tender and green, not yet the red shown in tourist calendars. The tag stuck from the pot at an angle. Autumn Blaze Maple. Walter touched one leaf with the back of a finger. Soft, alive. He bought it without overthinking, which surprised him. Back home, it took him too long to get the shovel from the shed. Too long to lower himself to the ground. Too long to dig through the stubborn strip of earth beside the front walk. His knee screamed every time he bent wrong. Twice he had to stop and sit back on the grass, breathing hard dirt on his palms. But he kept going. The hole did not come out neat. The tree leaned a little at first until he packed the soil tighter around it. By the time he finished, his shirt clung damply to his back and his hands shook from effort. Walter sat on the front step and looked at the sapling. It was small enough to snap in a storm if the wind turned cruel. Small enough that nobody passing by would think much of it. Still, it was there now. Something placed in the ground for later. Something that expected a season beyond this one. Walter stayed on the step until the ache in his leg drove him back inside. He had barely lowered himself into the recliner again when the phone rang. Sarah. He stared at the screen. For one wild second, he considered letting it go to voicemail. Not to punish her. Just to breathe first. Just to know he could. But he answered on the fourth ring. Hey, sweetheart. Dad. Her voice was tight, moving too fast. No opening question this time. No, how are you? No small weather between them. Tom got laid off. Just temporary, they said, but rent's due Friday and I don't know what we're supposed to do here. Walter closed his eyes briefly. The house still smelled of damp dirt from his shoes. Sarah kept talking. I've been calling around all day. We can maybe put groceries on the credit card for a week or two, but the rent... She exhaled sharply. I hate asking. I know I just asked. Walter looked at the envelope on the table, at the folded surgery estimate beneath it. How much? He asked, though he already knew it would be a number large enough to hurt. 2,000. The room seemed to go very still. 2,000. Nearly half of what he had left. More than half of what would remain after surgery. Enough to turn a bad decision into a permanent one. Sarah's voice dropped softer. Dad? Walter opened his mouth. The old answer rose first. Of course, I'll send it tonight. Same reflex, same path worn smooth by years, but Carl's voice cut through it. That's a hostage situation. Walter looked down at his wrapped knee. At the edge of the brace under his sweatpants. At the dirt still under one thumbnail from planting the tree. His tongue felt thick. I need to think about it, he said. Silence. Not a pause, silence. Then Sarah said, What? Walter swallowed. I said I need to think about it. Her breathing changed on the other end. He could hear the shock in it, and then something else moving in behind it. Hurt maybe, or fear, or just the sound a pattern makes when it breaks for the first time. Dad, it's rent. Rent. I know. I'm not asking for something extra. I'm asking so we don't lose the apartment. Walter's hand drifted to his knee without meaning to. I know, he said again. Sarah was quiet for a second too long, and when she spoke again, her voice had gone flatter. Are you saying no? Walter stared at the small maple outside the window, thin in the evening light. No, he said, I'm saying I need a few days. A few days? She sounded like he had switched languages mid-sentence. Rent is due Friday. Walter did not answer right away. His jaw had tightened so hard it hurt. On the edge of his tongue sat another sentence, one he had never said to her cleanly. And I'm going to be crippled, sweetheart. Which one matters less? But he did not say it, not yet. The words stayed inside him, hot and unfinished. Sarah let out a breath. Okay, she said at last. But there was no okay in it. Then the line went dead. Walter sat with the phone still at his ear until the silence turned cold. The room had gone dim. He did not remember the light changing. He did not remember evening arriving. He set the phone down face up this time and watched it like a man waiting for a fuse to reach the powder. It did not buzz again. He reheated soup and ate 3 spoonfuls standing at the counter before the pain in his leg drove him back to the chair. He turned on the television and muted it. He looked at the bank statement again. Folded it. Unfolded it. Checked the time. Waited. At some point, the cat returned and settled at his feet. 9 o'clock, 10, 11. No call, no text. For a few minutes, Walter thought maybe that was the answer. Maybe Sarah had found someone else to borrow from. Maybe Tom's job had come back. Maybe the emergency had bent around him for once. Then, a little after midnight, the phone lit up. A single message. Walter picked it up. Dad, please, we're going to be evicted. He read it once. Then again. The words sat on the screen like a hand closing around his throat. Across the street, the new maple moved faintly in the dark wind. Walter looked from the message to the bank envelope on the table, then back to the message. His thumb hovered over the keyboard. The house was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the small engine of the cat's sleep. He did not type. Not yet. The crossroads. 3 days later, Walter sat in the recliner with the new surgery estimate in his lap and Sarah's college graduation photo in his hand. She was 22 in the picture, cap tilted slightly back, black gown hanging loose at the sleeves. Her smile so wide it looked like it might split her face open. Walter remembered the weight of that day better than he remembered most of his own life. The heat on the football field, the folding chairs sinking into the grass, the cheap paper program sweating in his hand, Sarah turning in the crowd until she found him and lifting one arm high, waving like a little girl even then. He had never been prouder. He ran his thumb over the glass frame. Then the phone rang. Walter looked at the screen. Sarah. His chest tightened so fast it felt almost like the start of pain. He set the photo carefully on the side table and picked up the phone. Hey, sweetheart. There was a beat before she answered. Hi, Dad. Something in her voice was different. Not rushed, not already halfway inside a problem. Quiet maybe, or tired in a deeper way. Walter sat a little straighter in the chair. How are the kids? He asked. They're okay. That was all she said. Rain tapped lightly at the window. The young maple outside bent once in the wind and straightened again. The gray cat on the rug lifted her head, then tucked it back down. Walter waited. Sarah breathed in. Dad, she said, I've been thinking. His hand tightened around the phone. About what? About what you said. She stopped, then corrected herself. About what you didn't say, about me not calling unless I need something. Walter looked down at the surgery estimate across his lap. The paper had gone soft at the fold from how many times he had opened it. He did not answer. His heartbeat had picked up. He could feel it in his throat. Sarah spoke again, slowly now, like each word had to be chosen and held in place. I don't know how to talk to you without needing something. Walter closed his eyes. On the other end, she let out a shaky breath. I never learned, she said. When I was sad, you bought me things. When I was lonely, you sent money. When something went wrong, you fixed it with money. That's how we talk, Dad. Walter's fingers loosened around the paper until it slipped a little against his leg. He looked at the graduation photo again. At the bright face of the daughter he had loved with everything in him, even when he had loved her badly. I know, he said. The words came out so quietly he was not sure she heard them. But she did. I'm not blaming you, Sarah said quickly. I'm not, She stopped again. I don't know how to fix it. Walter looked toward the window. Outside, the maple was too small to cast much of a shadow yet. Just a thin shape against the gray afternoon. Me neither, he said. A long silence followed. Not empty this time. Not the old silence made of avoidance and shortcuts. This one had weight. It stayed in the room with him. It stayed on the line between them. Walter could hear her breathing. Once, far away, a child shouted something in the background. Sarah must have covered the phone for a second because the sound blurred and came back. Then she said it. I still need the $2,000, Dad. Walter bowed his head. The landlord called today. He did not answer right away. His eyes moved over the room without settling. The cat sleeping on the rug, the surgery estimate on his lap, the stack of pill bottles on the side table, the photo of Sarah at 22, the little maple outside, holding itself upright in the wind because no one else could do it for it. Walter knew, in that suspended second, that this was the moment the whole thing had been crawling toward for years. Not just money, not just rent. The question underneath all of it. Would he disappear again for her comfort? Would he pay to keep the old language alive? Or would he finally speak the truth, even if it cost him the sound of her voice? Walter inhaled slowly. When he answered, his voice was steady. I can't, sweetheart? Sarah said nothing. The silence lasted long enough for Walter to hear the blood moving in his own ears. Then softly, a what? Walter looked down at his right knee under the brace. At the shape of the joint that had decided the truth before he had. I need surgery, he said. My knee. I've been putting it off for 2 years because I was saving money for you. But I can't walk anymore. I can't even sleep. The words were plain once they started. Plain and ugly and overdue. On the other end, Sarah went completely still. When she spoke, her voice had thinned. Why didn't you tell me? Walter leaned back and looked at the ceiling. Because I was ashamed, he thought. Because pain felt smaller than the idea of being unwanted. Because silence had become easier than risk. He swallowed once. Because I didn't want you to worry, he said. That was true. Then he added the harder part. Because I didn't want you to think I was weak. The room held still around him. Walter stared at the ceiling stain over the lamp and said the last piece before he could stop himself. Because I thought if I stopped giving, you'd stop calling. The line went quiet. Not cold, not angry. Quiet in the way a room goes quiet after something breaks and both people are waiting to hear what is still standing. Walter's grip on the phone tightened. Then he heard it. A sound from Sarah he had not heard in years. Not since the church. Not since she was 12 in black shoes and a borrowed dress, trying not to cry in public. She was crying. Not neatly. Not the pinched little sound of someone trying to stay composed. This was deeper. Rawer. as if the words had opened a place in her she had been walking around for years without seeing. Walter shut his eyes. "Sarah." "I'm sorry," she said, but the sentence broke in half. She took a breath that shook. "I'm sorry, Dad. I'm so sorry." Walter's mouth tightened. He looked at the graduation photo again, but the glass had blurred. It took him a second to realize his own eyes had filled. He wiped at one with the heel of his hand and took a breath. "Me too," he said. Sarah cried harder at that. The sound of it cut through him and yet, strangely, did not feel like punishment. It felt like truth finally being allowed in the room. Walter lowered his voice. "But I'm not sorry for choosing my leg," he said. He looked down at the surgery paper and laid one palm flat on it. "I'm sorry we waited this long to tell the truth." On the other end, Sarah tried to steady herself. He could hear her pressing her hand over her mouth, trying to get her breathing back under control. Walter waited. After a while, she whispered, "I didn't know." "I know." No, I mean it." She sniffed hard. "I really didn't know it was that bad." Walter glanced toward the staircase in the hallway. Even from here, it looked steeper than a staircase had any right to look. "I got good at not saying things," he said. Sarah gave a wet, broken laugh that was not really a laugh at all. "Yeah," she said, "I guess I got good at not asking." The honesty of it settled gently between them. No blame in her voice now, no defense in his. Just two people standing at the edge of what they had built together and finally calling it by its real name. Walter reached down and stroked the gray cat with the side of his foot. She stretched but did not wake. "Sweetheart," he said, "this part isn't your fault." Sarah took a long time to answer. "Not all of it," she said quietly. Walter let that stay. He did not rush to rescue her from it. He did not say, no, don't feel bad. That would have been another shortcut. Another way around the wound, instead of through it. At last, Sarah cleared her throat. "I'll figure it out," she said. Walter listened carefully. "The rent," she added. "I'll figure it out. I'll call my sister-in-law, or maybe the church, or..." She broke off and took a breath. "Something. I'll do something." Walter's hand loosened on the phone. "You get your surgery," she said. The words were simple, but they landed in him like warmth after cold. For a moment, he could not answer. Then he looked out the window at the young maple standing there in the weak light and said, "Okay." Sarah was quiet again, but softer now. "Dad?" "Yes?" "I love you." Walter bowed his head. The sentence moved through him slowly, like something stiff beginning to thaw. He looked at the graduation picture one more time. "I love you too," he said. He heard her inhale, then hold it, as if she were trying to make room inside herself for what came next. "I'm going to try," she said, "to call, just to talk." Walter's throat worked once. He could have said 100 things then. Could have told her she didn't need to promise anything. Could have made it easier, smaller, safer. Instead, he told the truth. "That's all I ever wanted." Neither of them spoke for a few seconds after that. But this silence was different too. Not hollow, not borrowed. It was the quiet of two people standing awkwardly in a doorway that had finally opened, unsure what came next, but no longer pretending the wall was a door. In the background on Sarah's end, one of the kids called for her. "I have to go," she said, and there was regret in it this time. Real regret, not just scheduling. "I know. I'll call you tomorrow, not about money." Walter gave the smallest smile. "I'll be here." "Okay." Another pause. Then Sarah said softer now, "Bye, Dad." "Bye, sweetheart." The line clicked off. Walter lowered the phone slowly. The room looked the same, the lamp, the folded blanket, the pill bottles, the surgery paper, the cat, the small maple outside the window. Nothing had changed. Everything had changed. He set the phone down beside the graduation photo and leaned back in the recliner. His knee still hurt. The rent was still due somewhere, 400 miles away. The surgery would still come with forms and bills and fear. Sarah's promise was only a promise. It might hold, it might not. But the old bargain had broken. And for the first time in years, Walter did not feel like he had purchased the sound of his daughter's voice. He had simply heard it. The flowers. 3 months later, Walter could cross the living room without holding his breath. Not fast, not easily, but upright. The walker moved ahead of him with a soft scrape over the floorboards. His right leg still ached, especially in the morning and when rain pressed in from the west, but it was a cleaner kind of pain now. Honest pain. Healing pain. Not the deep, rotting grind that had hollowed out his days before the surgery. The gray cat named Sarah wove around the legs of the walker as if trying to trip him on purpose. "Not today," Walter muttered. The cat flicked her tail and kept circling anyway. Walter reached the window, paused, and straightened a little more. Outside, the young maple he had planted stood taller than it had any right to after only one season. Still thin, still fragile, but greener now, settled. Its leaves moved softly in the late summer light. He stood there a moment longer than he needed to. 3 months. In 3 months, Sarah had not called to ask for money once. 4 phone calls. That was all. 10 minutes the first time, awkward and careful, both of them sounding like strangers trying not to scare each other off. 15 the second time, 20 the third. Last week, nearly half an hour. They had talked about Eli's cough, Maddie starting soccer, the heat wave down there, the tomato plants Sarah had somehow kept alive on the apartment balcony. Once they had even talked about Linda. Only for a minute. Only one memory each, but still. Walter had listened to all of it with quiet suspicion, as if kindness might be something that startled easily and disappeared if looked at too directly. He still did not fully trust it. Not because Sarah had done anything wrong these past months. Because hope, after a certain age, could feel more dangerous than disappointment. He set the walker brakes and eased himself into the recliner. The cat jumped up beside him at once, then settled against his good hip. On the side table sat his pill bottle, his glasses, and the old photo of Sarah at 5 in her paper flower crown. Next to it now was the graduation picture. He had put them side by side after the surgery. 5 years old and 22, missing tooth and black cap and gown, 2 versions of the same girl, 2 reminders that time had kept moving even when love had gotten stuck. Walter picked up the graduation photo. Today, Sarah would be 35, going on 36 soon enough. He would be 70. 70. The number felt both too large and somehow unfinished. He had not expected anything from the day. That had become its own small protection over the years. Better to make coffee, do the exercises the therapist had given him, heat up oatmeal, let the day pass like any other Tuesday, and ask nothing of it. The doorbell rang at 9:20 in the morning. Walter looked up. The cat lifted her head too. He waited, thinking maybe he had imagined it. Nobody came by that early unless it was Carl, and Carl never used the bell. Carl pounded on doors like he was collecting debts. Then it rang again. Walter pushed himself up from the recliner, reached for the cane by habit, then stopped. He looked at it for a second, left it leaning where it was, and took the walker instead. The trip to the front door was slow but steady. When he opened it, the porch stood empty except for a tall glass vase wrapped in brown paper and tied with plain white string. Flowers. Walter stared down at them. Not expensive looking in a showy way, just full. White daisies, a few pale yellow roses, green stems, little sprays of blue he did not know the names of. The kind of bouquet someone had thought about long enough to want it gentle. A small card was tucked into the paper. Walter bent with more care than grace, lifted the vase, and carried it inside. Water sloshed against the glass. He set it on the kitchen table first, then reached for the card. No name on the outside. His fingers moved more slowly than they should have over the fold. Inside, in handwriting he knew at once, were only a few words. "Happy birthday, Dad. I'm learning. Give me time. Love, Sarah." Walter read it once, then again. The kitchen went very still. He pulled out a chair and sat down harder than he meant to. The card stayed open in his hand. His thumb rested over the word Dad, as if to make sure it did not slide away. "I'm learning. Give me time. Love, Sarah." His mouth tightened, then loosened, then tightened again. For a second, he looked toward the window over the sink at nothing in particular. The neighbor's fence, the patch of sun on the grass, the edge of the young maple's leaves moving in light wind. 23 years of waiting for the wrong proof, and here it was in his hand. Small and late and imperfect and real. Walter bowed his head. The tears came quietly. Not with the sharp ache of grief, not with the humiliation of a man breaking down in front of strangers. These came softer. He covered his eyes with one hand and let them come. It was not the flowers themselves, not really. It was that someone had thought of him before he asked. That someone had reached toward him without first needing something back. That after so many years of being useful, he had been remembered. The phone rang on the table beside the vase. Walter wiped once at his face, took a breath, and answered. "Hello? Dad?" Sarah. Her voice carried a thin smile and a nervousness she was trying to hide. Walter looked at the flowers again. "Yeah, sweetheart," he said. His voice came out rougher than he wanted. "I got them." On the other end, Sarah was quiet for half a second, like she had heard the tears anyway. "Did you?" she asked. "Yeah," he glanced at the card in his hand. "I got them." Another small pause. "I wanted to drive down," she said, "but the car..." Walter let his eyes rest on the bouquet. On the yellow rose, not fully open yet. On the little blue flowers tucked low between the white petals. "It's okay," he said. "The flowers are enough." Sarah exhaled softly. "They're not," she said, "but it's a start." Walter leaned back in the kitchen chair. The morning light fell across the table and across the vase, across his hand still holding the card. He nodded even though she could not see it. "It's a start." That seemed to let something ease in her. "How are you feeling?" she asked. Walter looked down at his leg. The swelling had gone down. The scar was still tender and angry looking. Physical therapy still left him sore. Sometimes he woke at night with the old fear still in him before remembering the worst of the pain was gone. "Better," he said. "Still stiff. Still walking like an old refrigerator, but better." Sarah laughed. A real laugh this time, not polite, not tired. "That bad?" "Worse, probably. I'm glad you got the surgery." Walter looked at the window, at the thin green tree he had planted when things still felt impossible. "Me too," he said. Then after a pause, "I'm glad I'm still here." Sarah went quiet. But it was not a frightened silence. More like she was holding the sentence gently, turning it over. "Me too," she said at last. They talked after that. Not in a miraculous movie scene kind of way. Nothing in Walter's life had ever worked like that. No sudden perfect closeness, no grand speeches, no magic erasing the years. They just talked. About Eli losing another tooth at school and proudly refusing the nurse. About Maddie insisting she wanted to become a veterinarian even though she was currently afraid of dogs bigger than a toaster. About Carl showing up twice a week and complaining the whole time while bringing soup anyway. About physical therapy. About how Pittsburgh would start turning cold soon. About how Sarah had tried to make her mother's banana bread last month and somehow burned the top while leaving the middle half raw. "Sounds like your mother's revenge," Walter said. Sarah laughed again, then surprised him by saying, "I wish I'd asked her to teach me." Walter looked down at the edge of the birthday card. "Yeah," he said softly. "Me too." The conversation kept going. It wandered, it doubled back, it paused, and started again. Once there was a whole minute spent discussing whether the cat still scratched the couch. Another 5 on whether Eli should be allowed to get a turtle. The kind of talk Walter used to think did not count because it solved nothing. Now he listened to every ordinary word like a man warming his hands over a small fire. At one point, Sarah said, "I almost didn't send the flowers." Walter smiled faintly. "Why?" "I felt stupid." "Why?" Another pause, then, "Because it felt small." Walter looked at the bouquet again. "No," he said, "no, not small." Sarah did not answer right away. When she did, her voice had softened. "Okay." By the time they hung up, 45 minutes had passed. 45 minutes. Walter sat with the silent phone in his hand for another few seconds after the call ended, just listening to the quiet house. Then he rose carefully, took the bouquet from the kitchen table, and carried it into the living room. He set the flowers beside the picture of Sarah at 5. The paper flower crown in the photograph looked almost ridiculous next to the real bouquet. Crooked and childish and bright, Walter stood there a moment with one hand on the back of the chair. Then, without reaching for the cane leaning by the wall, he turned and walked to the front window. Slowly, deliberately. No cane. No walker. The leg still complained, but it held. At the window, he rested his fingertips on the sill and looked outside. The maple had grown nearly 3 feet now. Not tall, not strong enough yet to forget the wind, but rooted, alive. Its leaves trembled in the sunlight. At the base of the tree, the gray cat named Sarah lay stretched in a warm patch of grass, belly half up, as if the whole yard belonged to her. Walter smiled. It came without effort, small but real. Behind him, the phone sat quiet on the side table. For the first time in many years, Walter did not feel fear when he looked at it. Not fear that it would ring. Not fear that it would stay silent. He stood in the soft morning light with the flowers behind him, the small maple before him, and the ache in his leg no longer meaning the same thing it once had. The wound was still there. So was the love. But now, at last, they were not speaking through money. And that changed the sound of everything.